His name was Gianluca Pericolo. As a boy, he was very sick. Just when doctors had given up hope, Passione stepped in and saved him. He and his father, Nunzio Pericolo, joined the syndicate to repay that debt. 6 months ago, he learned of his father's death. His father had placed a gun to his temple and pulled the trigger. Most men would see that as a suicide. Gianluca was not most men.
Papa gave his life to the boss for mine.
He knew this to be the truth. His father had been on a mission so secret he'd not breathe the word of it to his son. Certain that there would be an upheaval within Passione, he assembled his men and prepared for the worst. Less than a week later, the boss revealed his identity to all. Everyone was shocked. Everyone but Pericolo. He visited each capo in turn, unarmed, allaying their suspicions.
Vowing unswerving loyalty to Giorno is the right choice.
His father had given his life to keep Passione stable. Now it was his turn. In return for his efforts, he was given all the territory his father had run, and elevated quickly to a position at the hand of the boss, working directly below Guido Mista. But he took no pride in it. This was his father's work. He merely served in his father's place. He kept himself modest, at a respectful distance. As soon as Pericolo received the message, he went to report its contents to the boss.
Pardon me.
The boss was in a library in Neapolis, serving the middle school, high school, and university. The boss was, officially, a student here. He rarely attended classes, but when he wished to be alone with his thoughts, he would often come here, at least during the night when no students were there. The library was not open yet, so the lights were off. Pericolo picked his way through the darkness. The librarians knew better than to interfere with gang business, and made themselves scarce when he was here. There was no sound anywhere. No sound save the echo of his footsteps. The deeper he went, the older the books became, until all the books were in Latin. A boy was in the art history corner, sitting on a tall stool designed to reach the top shelves, flipping through a book, Politicità di Michelangelo by Giorgio Spini.
Am I disturbing you?
The boy waved a finger, indicating that he should proceed. Pericolo bowed and began.
We've received a report from Cannolo Murolo in intelligence. They have defeated the leader of the narcotics team, Vladimir Kokaki. Only 3 remain.
A shame. He was a fine man.
He had issued the order himself, yet retained respect. As he often did, Pericolo admired the timbre of the boy's voice. It had the solemn dignity of the pipe organ played at church.
It's still far from over.
Pericolo pulled himself upright.
Yes, I'm afraid so. The message said nothing of Massimo Volpe. Kokaki must have attacked on his own to buy time for his team to flee. They have not yet been located.
The boy nodded and returned his gaze to the book. There was an elegance to the way he turned the pages that was a marvel to behold.
Any further instructions?
The boy waved a finger. None needed.
Are you sure you don't want me and my men on this? Given the strength of the targets, we've sent so few after them.
He'd suggested this before. The boy did not even dignify it with a response. Repeating himself was useless.
If I could ask one thing.
The boy nodded.
Do you trust Fugo? I find it difficult to place my faith in him. My father gave his life for the mission he chose to defect on. Abandoning his teammates and an innocent girl to save himself. To give a man like that such an important mission seems unwise.
He was fully prepared to be rebuked for this statement, but the boy was not the least bit angry.
I know what you mean.
Then, why?
No answer came. Pericolo was forced to let the matter drop.
Should I put the screws on the Sicilian police? Have them on the lookout for Volpe?
Again the boy wagged his finger. What he said next nearly made Pericolo's eyes pop out of his head.
Don't worry. They'll tell us where they are.
What?
Screams ripped from Vittorio Cataldi's throat, as if his very grief was trying to kill him.
This is all my fault! I should have been the one to fight. Kokaki wouldn't have died if I had!
He chomped down on his lips hard, cutting through them. Blood spattered down his chin. The room he was in was a sight to behold. There were bite marks all over the walls. Even now, a fresh bite mark was gnawing its way into the wall. Vittorio's knife hung from his hip, its naked blade reflecting the wall, transferring 70% of the damage he was inflicting. Vittorio began beating his head against the wall. Dents began appearing on a totally different wall. The walls were much harder than his skull. Any one of these blows was hard enough to kill him instantly, were it not for his stand. He was flinging himself against the wall with all his strength, no considerations for his own safety. Perhaps his lack of self-control had led him to the part of his mind interested in self-preservation to give birth to a stand that transferred damage. Or perhaps years spent under the stand's protection had caused his recklessness. No one knew for sure, and it had never occurred to him to wonder. 30% of the damage was done to him, so his head was covered in blood, but this did not discourage him. Angelica was in the corner, sobbing. Vittorio had tried to comfort her several times, but to no avail. Each failure led to more self-harm. The door opened slowly, and Massimo Volpe drifted in. Neither of the others looked at him. They were too absorbed in their own grief. Volpe said nothing. He walked to the center of the room and collapsed. There was a long silence, broken only by sniffling and the rhythmic thudding of head against wall. At last, the latter sound stopped.
Got no choice now. Gotta go after that thing, like Kokaki said.
But he called that a last resort. We don't even know what it'll do.
We got any other ideas? They beat Kokaki. I don't even know if I could take someone like that down with me. We need to throw everything we got at them.
Think it'll work?
Well, even Kokaki seemed pretty dubious.
The reason I decided to take the fight to Sicily isn't just because it's my home and I know the lay of the land, or because Piacion's influence isn't as strong. There's another reason. A reason dating back to the Nazi occupation. During the occupation, they busied themselves with a certain research project. The bulk of their attention was centered on Rome, but there was a team here in Sicily as well. The Nazis were scouring the world, looking for something many an ancient emperor dreamed of. That idiot Führer wanted it too. Eternal life. The Nazis dreamed of a powerful army of troops that couldn't be killed. They poured a lot of resources into the search, but the man in charge, an SS colonel named Rudolf von Stroheim, was killed in Stalingrad, and the Allied forces reclaimed Sicily before their discovery could be removed. It lies buried here to this day. Exactly what they found, I don't know. All I found were words, instructions on the use of it. Blood is life.
Remembering this, Volpe found himself shivering.
Invincible, undying warriors.
That's the only way we can win!
Volpe's eyes went grim.
We need it to avenge Kokaki.
Suddenly, Angelica let out a particularly loud sob. Staring at nothing, fury on her face, she roared,
They must pay. They must pay. We must make them pay. They must pay, 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 pay!
We got to do this! It's the only thing we can do!
He jumped to his feet and ran out of the room. Angelica wafted after him. Alone in the room, Volpe sat for a moment, then rose to his feet and followed them out, leaving behind an empty horror. Every corner of the room was covered in human blood. Chunks of flesh stuck to every surface. Broken bones jammed into the walls, stuck where they had been flung. A solitary chin dangled from the ceiling. The remains of 20 men, destroyed beyond recognition. The pieces scattered across the room. This was the work of Massimo Volpe's stand gone berserk. As he picked his way through the carnage, he muttered something under his breath.
But what exactly is this stone mask?
This is gross.
Stepping into the blood-stained room.
What the hell?
These are locals. Sicilian gangsters. Not involved with Passion. Friends of Kokaki's. When he died, they decided it wasn't worth it to hide Volpe and his team. Turned on them. Got wiped out themselves.
They do this to people who'd been their allies only a moment before? If they turned on them, they could have just run for it. They could have gotten away easily. There's no reason to massacre them. Cruelty like this is usually intended as a message for those who find it. But this is beyond that. There's a break here. A decisive one.
Sheila E. gave him a look.
They were never allies.
Huh?
There was no trust, no give and take. They had no partners, no structures. The narcotics team never worked for anyone but each other.
She looked around at the corpses dispassionately. Fugo almost asked if she was describing herself as well, but decided against it. He felt like her attitude had changed recently. At first, she'd spent a lot of time glaring at him, but now she seemed to be doing her best not to make eye contact. Perhaps because he'd strangled her during the fight against Kokaki.
But I had no idea if she was under his control or not. I had no choice. But I can see how she'd hold a grudge.
Fugo's mood was increasingly gloomy. He felt backed into a corner with no way out. But Murolo, oblivious to the tension between them, announced cheerily,
We won't even have to look for them. They'll head straight to their destination, leaving a mound to the corpses in their wake, heedless of the consequences, telling us exactly where they're going.
He snorted and left the room. A minute later, they heard him clapping. He was using his stand. Fugo and Sheila E. followed him in, arriving just as the card tower collapsed.
Oh, teacher!
The ace of spades fell flat on its face. Murolo applauded. The cards stood up, took their bows, and filed back into his hat.
So?
Yep, Ortesia. They're following the coast of Sicily down to Syracuse.
But there's nothing there but ruins and historical landmarks. What are they doing in a place like that?
We can ask that once we catch them, if they survive it.
Murolo whipped out his phone. He dialed quickly, then spoke to someone on the other end.
It's me. Yeah, bring it on by. They're headed to Syracuse. Make sure it has enough fuel.
Fuel? What did you just call for?
A helicopter, of course. It'll fly us to Syracuse. Get us there before they arrive. We'll be waiting for them this time.
Fugo frowned. He'd almost ridden in a helicopter once. Narancia had found it.
It's a helicopter key. If we use that, they'll never catch us. We could go anywhere.
They'd never used the helicopter. But if they had, Fugo wondered if Narancia would have been every bit as excited as he'd been on the yacht. Or would the gravity of their mission have prevented that?
He was never one to stress out about things. Always the first to break the tension. Just couldn't concentrate, I guess. Too easygoing by nature.
Had that killed him in the end? Fugo gritted his teeth. He had no idea what had happened to him. No way of knowing. He hadn't gone with them. That's why he was here. Trish Una. Protecting her was to be Bucciarati's team's final job for Passione. Diavolo's daughter, raised in ignorance of that fact, sent to meet her father after her mother's death, only to find he planned to kill her. The girl's very life a tragedy.
But
Fugo still felt no sympathy for her. He'd spent only 2 days with her, but she'd spent the entire time stone-faced, betraying no trace of what she was thinking. When she did open her mouth, it was to demand they do her shopping, risk themselves to purchase things that seemed hardly necessary, or demand one of them to take off their shirt to replace her handkerchief. It was difficult to feel protective of her. Fugo despised his own mother and hardly had a high opinion of women in general. He especially hated high-strung women, which Trish clearly was.
why risk everything for her?
To this day, he could not understand Bucciarati's decision.
Returning with Trish means that I have now betrayed the boss. He only had us guard her so that he could kill her with his own hand. Because, as his blood relative, she knew his true identity. When I learned this, I couldn't look the other way. I couldn't go home and wash my hands of the whole business. I chose to turn traitor.
It was dawn. The world was quiet. The air was crisp. Fugo couldn't believe what he was hearing, but it was the truth. Trish lay in front of them, bleeding. Everything they'd been told was a lie.
Have you lost your mind, Bucciarati?
You know what happens to traitors. You better than most. The boss won't let us get away.
He frowned. Abacchio himself had been responsible for dispatching traitors. They'd just taken out the assassination team for that very reason.
The boss's guards will have Venice surrounded by now.
Bucciarati was unmoved. Behind him, Giorno was equally impassive.
I need help. If any of you would come with me, come down the stairs and step onto the boat.
He pointed at the tiny boat floating on the canal behind him. Trish was already on board, bleeding from the wrist.
But I won't order you to come with me. I won't even wish for it. This was my decision. You need feel no obligation towards me. I will say only this. I did what I felt was right. I have no regrets. The world being what it is, all I can do is follow my beliefs. Everyone has a weakness. For now, all I can do is run. But we will beat the boss someday. We will find his weakness.
Faced with the strength of Bucciarati's belief and the force behind his words, Fugo felt nothing but confusion. He had no idea what Bucciarati meant by right. That was a belief he had never once encountered at any point in his life. It was like his entire world had been snatched away from him, left without direction, without goals, without anything to base his actions on, nothing to give him direction. He had placed his faith in Bucciarati. He knew Bucciarati's decisions were usually correct and believed that what was good for Bucciarati was good for him. That was no longer true. When Bucciarati had scouted Fugo, he told him he had no shot at rehabilitation. Yet here Bucciarati was, holding up a groundless, foolish moral choice as if it was worth fighting for, even though that fight would surely lead to his destruction. Abacchio sat down heavily. Mista looked away, staring into the distance. Narancia was shaking, trembling in his boots. Was nobody going to say anything? Were none of them going to do anything? Was there nothing to be done to fix this mess? He grit his teeth, and forced himself to speak.
I understand what you're saying, Bucciarati. What you're doing is the right thing to do.
Fugo wasn't the least bit convinced by anything Bucciarati had said, but he'd said it to be diplomatic. That wouldn't work, though. He had to be clear.
But let me be clear. I'm afraid none of us will get on that boat. You let your emotions cloud your judgment. We all owe you, but we aren't coming. You aren't looking at reality. You can't survive on ideals alone. We can't live outside of Passione.
He took a pointed step back. At the time, Fugo still thought there was a chance he could salvage the situation, a faint hope that Bucciarati would change his mind, that they could save him by turning Trish over to the boss. He desperately wanted to believe this. He had hoped his words would make him rethink things.
Fugo's right, Bucciarati. What you're doing is suicide. No matter where you run, no place will be safe.
Yes, Fugo thought. Keep talking like this. Maybe he'll change his mind. We all trust each other. That trust has to count for something. We can't just drop all that.
I swore loyalty to Passione, not to you. But I was a man with no place to go, cast out of society. The only time I feel at home is when I'm with you, Bucciarati.
Without wasting another moment, he stepped onto the boat and sat down. Fugo couldn't believe it.
What? Abacchio!
What was he thinking? Here Fugo was, doing his best to fix things, and Abacchio just destroyed his entire argument.
If we beat the boss, that makes me the next capo, right?
He hopped on the boat also. Like it wasn't a big deal at all. Fugo could feel the rage building. How stupid could they be?
You've all lost your minds! There'll be no one to help you! Where will you even go? You'll never even make it out of Venice!
His voice was a shriek, but none of them even glanced his way. Giorno, by far the calmest person there, spoke quietly.
Narancia, what will you do?
Fugo jumped. He turned and looked at Narancia. Narancia was a mess, twitching like a lost child, his mouth flapping wordlessly. He looked at Bucciarati for help.
What should I do? Bucciarati, I don't know what to do. Should I come with you?
Are you scared?
Yeah, terrified. If you tell me, if you order me to come with you, then I'll find the courage. Nothing you tell me to do will ever be scary.
No, I can't order this. You have to decide. Decide your own path.
I don't know. I don't know what to do.
But I will give you some advice, Narancia. Don't come. This path isn't for you.
Narancia clutched his head in both hands. Bucciarati turned and began casting off. Fugo was overwhelmed with helplessness. Misery gnawed at him. Why hadn't he seen reason? It was infuriating.
Why? Are you insane? What's wrong with you? We met her 2 days ago! We barely talked to the girl! We don't know her! We don't even know what kind of music Trish likes!
His voice was a wail, the cries of a sore loser. Nothing he could say would change things, but he couldn't stop himself from ranting. He glared balefully after the boat until a feeble voice behind him spoke.
Trish was abandoned by someone she trusted.
Whatever! She's his daughter. He can do what he wants. He has his reasons, I'm sure. It's got nothing to do with us. All we had to do was close our eyes. I don't see why that is so damn hard.
I was abandoned too. My father, my friends, they all abandoned me. We're the same. Trish and me, we're the same.
Fugo turned and stared at him, but Narancia was already moving. As Fugo turned towards him, he brushed past Fugo, diving into the canal. He started swimming after the boat. Fugo stared after him blankly, unable to react at all. Narancia was never a great swimmer and was barely keeping himself afloat.
Bucciarati! I'm coming with you! Wait for me!
As his voice faded into the distance, Fugo stood rooted to the spot. All he could do was watch. Watch Narancia struggle, listen to his cries.
Don't tell me not to come with you! Trish is me! She's the same as me! The wound on her arm are my wounds!
The boat stopped to pick him up. Then they were gone. He never once looked back at Fugo. None of them did. And like that, he was all alone. The anger had left him completely. It took him a while to notice. He wasn't upset at the betrayal, nor relieved to be alive. His heart was empty, devoid of all feelings. He was abandoned. But by what? Wasn't he the one who'd abandoned them? So why did he feel like he'd been abandoned? He stood perfectly still as the sun rose higher in the sky, and the world grew bright around him. He could feel his skin starting to burn in the sun. It was painful. Everything hurt. It hurt, but what it was, Fugo didn't know. Why, he thought. Why wasn't he mad? None of what had happened was logical. None of it made sense. So why hadn't he lost his temper? Why wasn't he breaking everything in sight? He couldn't figure it out. The helicopter was flying over the Ionian Sea, along the coast where the Magara Hiblea lies. Watching the land race by them, Fugo wondered why Narancia had said that. Trish is me. What could that mean? A mere expression of sympathy? Narancia and Trish hadn't known each other well enough to give rise to emotions like that. They really didn't know each other at all. Narancia didn't have the emotional connection to Trish required to risk his life for her. Fugo was sure of it. But he had no idea why Bucciarati had wanted to save her enough to throw his life away either. Abacchio he understood. Fugo knew the man felt guilty about his time as a corrupt cop. He'd more or less joined Passione looking for a place to sacrifice himself. He had no interest in protecting Trish. He simply latched on to what Bucciarati had said about this being the right thing to do. It didn't matter what that thing was. Mista was equally simple. He must have decided to go with Bucciarati instantly, perhaps hoping to get his hands on the boss's treasure, or some such simple-minded ambition. The only reason he didn't jump on board right away was that this would have made him the fourth person on board. He waited for Abacchio, which made him the fifth. Mista's conviction that luck would always be on his side as long as he avoided the number 4 had long since passed beyond superstition into the basis of some private religion. There was no point in trying to understand.
In Giorno.
Fugo felt a chill run down his spine. If Fugo had made any mistakes back then, it was his assumption that Bucciarati was calling the shots, when in fact, it had been Giorno all along. He should have tried to change that boy's mind, not Bucciarati's. Giorno Giovanna was determined to take down the boss and wrest control of his power. Bucciarati simply followed his lead.
Come to think of it, Giorno volunteered to take Trish to the boss. Abacchio objected, and Bucciarati wound up taking her. Maybe we should have let Giorno go. If he'd managed to win, maybe none of this would have ever happened.
Perhaps Giorno would have let Trish die, sacrifice her for a clue to the boss's identity, allowing him to formulate a better, safer plan, one with less deaths on his side. He didn't exactly wish that was what had happened, but if it had, Fugo would never have left. If only Abacchio had kept his... No, there was no point in dwelling on hypotheticals. Ultimately, all of them were just caught up in the battle between Giorno and Diavolo. Like the battles in epics, two legends out to prove which of them was the true ruler. Whether they fled or it killed them, none of them were responsible. They were all victims.
What were you thinking, Narancia?
That question kept nagging at his heart like a fishbone stuck in his throat. He tried to convince himself he'd made the right call, that his choice had been the smart one, but he couldn't.
Narancia went with them. I couldn't.
That was the truth, and nothing would ever change that.
Why Trish is me, Narancia? What were you feeling?
The helicopter flew on towards Syracuse. A Passione pilot was flying it. Murolo sat in the co-pilot seat. Sheila E. sat next to Fugo, her arms crossed, her silence stony. Fugo glanced over at her. She didn't talk much. She and Trish had that in common, at least.
If you...
What?
Well... If you suddenly found yourself with a bunch of strange men, how would you act?
Why do you ask?
Just wondering.
I don't know. Make sure they didn't fuck with me?
Meaning?
Wouldn't give them the time of day.
Fugo blinked. Was that why Trish had been so hostile? She was trying to maintain some degree of control, a desperate attempt to protect herself. She wasn't acting haughty because she was the boss's daughter, but because she was trying to keep herself safe.
Still.
Remembering the way Trish had actually behaved, he couldn't feel any sympathy for her. Not wanting to be hurt was no excuse for hurting other people. He couldn't bring himself to cut her any slack.
Is that because she hurt me?
The thought didn't sit well with him. Did he really hate her because she'd effectively forced him to part with Bucciarati? Was he unconsciously out for payback, holding a grudge? He knew that was hardly fair, but the more he thought about it, the more certain he was that those feelings were a part of him. With Fugo lost in thought, a silence settled on the cockpit again. Well, not silence. The helicopter's blades were extremely loud.
Fugo, are you?
She trailed off. Fugo glanced at her, but she seemed like she wasn't planning on finishing that thought. He didn't pry. Their silence seemed to make Murolo uncomfortable, and he started pestering the pilot with questions.
Hey, pilot! Aren't we flying too high? Drop us down a little. They'll see us.
The higher you fly, the less people notice. We're too small to see from down below. You never done this before?
I don't care if we look big or small. They'll know which way we're headed.
We go lower, we can't fly as fast. You're the one in a hurry.
That's fine. It's still faster than a car or a train. Just do what I...
He broke off, staring at something past the pilot outside the window. There was a little bird flying next to them, matching pace with the helicopter.
How fast are we going?
You said you were in a hurry, so I'm pushing her. This is a fast machine. We're easily over 250 kilometers per hour.
So, what's up with that bird?
Murolo pointed out the window. It didn't even look like it was trying that hard to keep up. No normal bird would come close to a helicopter. The spinning blades tore up the air currents, but this bird didn't seem put out in the least, like it was flying on a calm day. And it was getting closer to them.
No! That's not a bird! It's an enemy!
Too late. The helicopter dropped like a stone towards the sea below. The girl, who could only survive on drugs, had unleashed all her pent-up, bottomless, unshakable fury on them.
It's no coincidence. I could call you heaven sent, and I can sense your energy. You want the same as me. Watch your body communicate, reciprocate. spills down my neck. And I'm no science teacher, but I can feel our chemistry. It's blowing through the speakers. 'Cause I feel electric tonight. Every time you look in my eyes, it makes me wanna scream. I feel my dangerous side coming over me when I scream. Now this is real to me. It's ecstasy, not tongue in cheek. Given the circumstances, I could be a good man to you. I feel it in my hands, and it makes me wanna dance. And I'm no longer 17, but girl, you make me feel that way. I feel electric tonight. Every time you look in my eyes, it makes me wanna scream. I feel my dangerous side coming over me when I scream. I feel electric, alright. I can see inside of your eyes that you just wanna scream. You feel magnetic. Our body language don't just talk a